In the quiet Scottish village of Auldearn, where fear wasn't just believed, it was enforced. People feared God, the devil, and everything that moved in the dark. But no one expected the terror to walk calmly into the church and introduce itself. Her name was Isobel Gowdie, a poor, ordinary woman, until the day she did something no one could understand. A needle was passed through her flesh to falsify her supernatural claims. She didn't scream, she didn't bleed. Instead, she smiled. She didn't deny the accusations. She didn't beg for mercy. She confessed, not just to witchcraft, but to things so detailed, so disturbing, that the men judging her began to question their own reality. In this witchcraft documentary, watch Isobel, revealing some horrific truths that were hard to digest by folks. Isobel claimed she met a figure known only as the Man in Grey. Not in dreams, but in the flesh. The Man in Grey did something unexplainable with her. From that moment on, something evil happened with Isobel. She described rituals where toads were used to plough the land, bringing the famine to the lands. She claimed she could break her own bones, reshape her body, and run through the night as a hare, escaping hunters who never realized what they were chasing. So the question is, why would a woman willingly confess to horrors that guaranteed her death? And more importantly, what if she wasn't lying? The year 1662 in Auldearn, Scotland, felt like the end of the world. The air was thick with the smell of wet peat and the heavy, suffocating weight of strict, unforgiving Presbyterian morality. In this bleak landscape, a woman named Isobel Gowdie walked toward the local kirk. She was not there to pray for her soul. She was there to hand it over to a shadow that waited in the dark. Isobel was a young woman, but her mind was a cauldron of forbidden visions. She lived in a society that demanded total silence from women. But in the flickering candlelight of her own imagination, she was becoming a queen. The Scottish Highlands were a place where the barrier between the physical world and the spirit realm was dangerously thin. People believed in the fair folk and the old ones as much as they believed in the Bible. Isobel's story did not begin with a whispered rumor. It began with a scream of absolute, terrifying honesty. Unlike other accused women who were broken by iron boots and sleep deprivation, Isobel Gowdie spoke with a strange, chilling hunger. She stepped forward and began to weave a narrative so dark and so detailed that it froze the blood of the magistrates. She didn't just admit to being a witch. She described the very anatomy of the occult. The most dramatic moment of her transformation occurred on a moonless night at the Auldean kirk. This was the night Isobel renounced her humanity and her god. She met a figure she called the Man in Grey in the graveyard. The Man in Grey was not a ghost. According to Isobel, he was a towering physical presence who radiated a cold, metallic energy. He wore a heavy grey cloak that seemed to swallow the dim light of the stars. In a ritual of absolute occultism, the Man in Grey stood before the altar of the church. He held a sharp, jagged piece of obsidian. He did not ask for a prayer. He demanded a sacrifice of blood and identity. Isobel knelt in the dirt before him. He took her hand and sliced a thin, precise line across her palm. As the dark blood pooled, he dipped his finger into the wound and marked her forehead with a secret sign. He then performed a mock baptism, pouring cold, stagnant water over her head in the name of the abyss. Isobel claimed that at that exact moment, her old life vanished. She was no longer a farmer's wife. She was Janet, This was the beginning of her membership in the Coven of 13. Isobel described how they would meet in the dead of night, hidden by the gorse and the mist, to perform rituals that defied every law of nature. One night, the Coven gathered in a hidden hollow. They brought with them a small wooden plough. But this was no ordinary tool for farming. It was a vessel for a curse intended to rot the land of their enemies. They caught several large, warty toads and harnessed them to the plough with tiny threads of silver. As the toads struggled, the witches danced in a reverse circle, chanting words that sounded like the grinding of ancient rusted gears. The man in grey stood in the center, his eyes glowing with an unnatural, pale light. As the toads pulled the plough across the soil, the grass beneath them withered and turned black instantly. The land was rendered barren. Isobel's descriptions of flight were even more sensational. She claimed that she and her sisters did not fly on brooms. They used beanstalks and straws, striking them with a magical rod and shouting, "Horse and hattock, in the devil's name!" She described the physical sensation of the air rushing past her face as she soared over the rooftops of Auldearn. She claimed they flew into the homes of the wealthy, drinking their wine and leaving behind a cold, lingering rot. The sensationalism of her confession reached a peak when she spoke of the Queen of Elfame. This was a powerful, beautiful, and terrifying spirit who lived under the hills in a palace of crystal and bone. Isobel claimed she visited this subterranean kingdom frequently. She saw the queen dressed in shimmering white silk, surrounded by elf bulls that guarded the gates. This was a realm of eternal twilight and forbidden, ancient, magical knowledge. The magistrate sat in stunned silence as Isobel detailed how she could change her shape at will. She claimed that by reciting a specific rhyme, she could transform into a fleet-footed hare to escape the local hunting dogs. "I shall go into a hare with sorrow and Psyche and Michael care," she chanted. She described the feeling of her bones shifting, her skin stretching, and her senses sharpening as she transitioned into the form of a wild animal. But why did she say all this? This is the psychological mystery at the heart of Isobel's darkness. There is no record of her being tortured. She seemed to take a perverse, calculated joy in terrifying the men who judged her. She was using her words as a weapon. In a world that ignored her, she made herself the most important and dangerous person in Scotland. She forced the powerful to look directly into the void she had created. Her confession was not a plea for mercy. It was a manifesto of power. She was showing the magistrates that while they controlled the law, she controlled the very fabric of reality and the shadows that lived within it. The occultism she described was not just about magic. It was about rebellion. Every ritual she performed was a direct insult to the king and the kirk. She was a revolutionary who used the supernatural to declare her independence. The man in grey, she claimed, was a harsh master. He would beat the witches with heavy wool cards if they were late to a meeting. Yet she spoke of him with a strange, dark reverence that unsettled the entire courtroom. She described the devil's mark on her shoulder. It was a spot of skin that was completely cold and felt no pain. To prove it, a witch pricker was called forward. He drove a long brass needle into her flesh. Isobel did not flinch. She did not bleed. She simply stared at the judge with a cold, mocking smile. This physical proof of her occult involvement sent the town of Auldearn into a state of absolute screaming religious hysteria. The fear spread like a plague. People began to see hares everywhere, believing each one was a member of Isobel's coven. They locked their doors and painted crosses on their thresholds, but the fear had already entered their minds. The sensational nature of the trial meant there was only one possible ending. Isobel Gowdie had confessed to too much darkness to be allowed to live. The law of 1662 was clear. The witch must be cleansed. The execution was a massive public event. A great pyre of wood was built on the hills overlooking the sea. The smell of salt air was soon replaced by the acrid, choking scent of burning pitch and dry straw. Isobel was led to the stake. Even then, she did not recant. She did not beg for her soul. She remained the architect of her own legend until the very last moment. She watched the flames with an eerie, calm detachment. As the fire rose, witnesses claimed to see a dark shape circling in the smoke. Some said it was a large black bird. Others whispered that it was the man in grey, coming to collect the soul he had purchased. Isobel Gowdie's death did not end the story. Her confessions became the most famous manual for witchcraft in history. Her words were copied and studied for centuries, fueling the imaginations of poets, writers, and those seeking the dark. She remains a shadow in the history of Auldearn. She is the woman who turned a quiet Scottish village into a gateway to the occult. She proved that the most powerful magic of all is the stories we tell about ourselves. Her legacy is one of absolute, unyielding defiance. She chose a path of darkness over a life of forced silence. She became an immortal figure of the occult, a queen of the hills who still haunts the Scottish mist.